Out. So let me welcome you to the European Value Center for Security Policy. Some of you are here for the first time, so we do apologize for the stairs, but it's actually a culturally protected building, so they could never build elevators here. So it's kind of exercise. But thank you very much for coming. I'll try to keep it short at the beginning. We will have people who are joining through the screen as well, but only us here in front are in the camera, so you don't have to worry about it if you are sitting in this room. We will actually try to keep it to 90 minutes. We will try to get the 60 minutes of the initial briefing of the beginning, and then we will do the Q&A. This event will be actually streamed online, and we do have a couple of colleagues who couldn't come in person, so they want to ask from the screen as well. So this event is actually part of the project which we've been doing together in EVC and our two Slovak partners, Europolicy and Gerulata Technologies. We have their senior analyst here with us. So first Lucia here and Tomáš Kriššák on my right as well. So we are happy that they made the trip here to discuss with us the results and maybe things which are more relevant for today. So what are the follow-ups and what we think are kind of takeaways for the information space between Czech Republic and Slovakia today and going to the future. This project has been funded by the Media and Information Fund. It has been a year-long project, and we are going to be publishing the study and the results later on too. Today we are mainly going to be discussing the main takeaways from what we think is actually relevant here. So maybe could we start with the presentation slowly? So what we did look into is that I'm here substituting our lead author on the EVC side, Veronika Krátka-Špaltová, who wrote the Czech chapter mainly. Our colleagues looked over the Slovak portion of the work. So the main, I would say, main focus which we had was that we together looked at the Vrbětice case. You do remember that in 2021, Czech government announced that a couple of years before that, the Russian military intelligence actually was involved and responsible for blowing up ammunition depot here on the Czech soil, which became one of the most, I would say, urgent and brutal cases of Russian aggression inside of the EU and inside of NATO. Impact, positive one. So that's what happened in political reality, but our main focus was really about what does it mean in the information space? What are the actors, the entities in the information domain in Czech Republic and in Slovakia? What are they really doing? And I think the relevance for today is really that what this study shows is that it's more like a screenshot of what the kind of the architecture of the information space is on the, let's say, pro-Western, or you would say pro-Czech or pro-Slovak sides, and also who are the usual pro-Russian or pro-Kremlin entities, because sadly that doesn't seem to be getting much better since this happened in 2021. So I think that's the relevance for our discussion today. So we will actually we have looked through the let's say information domain between April and December 2021, roughly more than half a year after the case was announced by the Czech government in April 2021. I won't bother you with all the technical details, you'll find them later, but actually what the team did is that we looked over almost 1,000 information pieces in the Czech Republic and more than 600 in Slovakia, which covered approximately 200 actors, so entities in the Czech information space, and 155 in Slovakia. And then what we did actually is looking into the top 5, you could say influencers, those who actually have the most impact in the information domain, to see what they were doing and how impactful it was. There we have
Actually, yes. So the obvious choice was to see who is effectively supporting the Russian messaging, who is supporting the Czech government's messaging, which was quite well echoed by many Western allies, EU and NATO institutions as well, and how actually relevant it was, whether those were politicians, individual influencers, or a specific type of media. That's something what we covered. What we will be surely discussing are the narratives which we identified. They are, I would say, not really different from what we have been seeing in the Czech and Slovak information space connected to other topics, and pretty much honestly connected to, for example, MH17 case in the past. So the narratives have been quite similar, such as blaming Czech Republic as being the puppet of the United States, or they call it useful idiot sometimes as well. That the Czech Republic is actually trying to bring NATO to war with Russia by actually exposing this case and allegedly lying about it. So that was the narrative, as you could imagine. And effectively, there were several efforts to deny the blame from Russia and put it on somebody else. The obvious culprit is always the United States, and then a couple of other entities. So I think we will actually discuss that maybe more during the discussion, who are or who have been the main drivers, the main messengers, let's say on the Czech side. So pretty much you could say on the Prussian side, those were the far right, pretty much the SPD political parties, couple of websites or media projects which are quite often spreading pro-Russian disinformation, and obviously Sputnik Czech Republic, which has been actually quite vocal on social media and even quite interesting. And unfortunately, during the time, it was President Zeman and during the time Prime Minister Andrej Babiš who actually did spread some of the narratives, actually, I would say, downplaying the case itself, saying, for example, that the attack actually was only an attack on goods, on like material, not on people or on the government or on the state, which then was pretty much denied by himself and the security entities. So that caused a lot of confusion. In Slovakia, I think my colleagues will discuss more in detail about the Slovak entities and the Slovak actors. So I will maybe not comment on in detail now, because I think it's relevant for today as well. We have tried to look over the narratives, meaning how, let's say, pro-Western, in this case, pro-governmental, you could say, in the Czech Republic, or pro-Russian have been. And in many cases, it's quite open. You could see how much, I mean, there's no surprise that Sputnik is doing it, because given it's a Russian government agency. But when you have, for example, Tomio Okamura, the far-right leader, political leader in the parliament, who is effectively copy-pasting the Russian messaging, then you see it's pretty much, let's say, almost 100%, or in this case, it's 100%, let's say, merge of the narrative. So there is nothing between that. Sorry, yes? Yes. We will definitely distribute it. I'm sure you can't see all the details, and there's a lot of numbers and a lot of that. So, and we don't have that much of time, and I thought it's better to discuss the content later. Yes. So this is I'm just trying to describe the main takeaways which we think are relevant. In the Slovak context, you could see a couple of entities, the political parties like Mr. Blaha, Luboš Blaha, who is quite vocal and I'm afraid quite significant today as well. Mr. Eduard Chmelar as well, who I would say we could call an activist or influencer in some ways on the social media, and a couple of other, let's say, entities who are relevant for our discussions. So I think what is interesting is to see the components of the narratives. So who actually spread what kind of narratives and how they were dispersed across the messengers, let's say, what they were actually saying, because that's something what basically tells you more about the politician or the specific media outlet. And I would say there were no major surprises how they acted during these more than half a year period during this crisis, similar as they did before when Russia invaded Ukraine first in 2014, and also after February 2022, after there was full-scale invasion as well. So I mentioned most of the narratives, but I think the relevant part is actually looking at the at what we identified as the goals, because that's basically the bottom lines. Sorry.
Yeah, a brief question, Jakub. Thank you. Very interesting already. There's a discrepancy between the number of pro-Russian, anti-Western expressions and the pro-Western / anti-Russian ones. Did that pose a methodological problem, or how did you count?
Yes.
I mean, that
Yes.
does not have the same weight maybe as a news story, etc. So
yes.
How do you solve that?
I'll maybe have my colleagues answer that later. Is that fine?
Okay.
Yes, they'll be discussing part of that in their methodology. So to show it, does it make sense?
Okay.
Yeah. Good. So let me just finish my part here on the goals, which I think are relevant because they are basically the core of the narratives and the messaging itself there as well. And there are effectively 4 key ones. One is the basically denying the blame of the Russian Federation in the whole affair. That's the obvious choice. That's something what we've seen Russia do during M817, during various other massacres in Ukraine and other places. So denying the Russian responsibility, Russian government's responsibility. The second one is actually effectively blaming the United States. That the US was responsible and it was clearly CIA doing it. That's the usual narrative which we see in most of the conspiracy discussions, and this was pretty much a mainstream one within the Czech pro-Russian discourse as well. And in the third part, the third goal was actually, let's say, creating the kind of a fog of confusion and saying that they might be somebody else responsible, not directly the United States, but that's basically the case how it was presented by the Czech government, actually by the Czech Prime Minister during the time, is dubious and it doesn't describe the reality. And those are narratives saying, oh, it was an attack on like a military installation, it was just a commercial attack on goods, for example, or that somebody else was behind it, and it was not a political or geopolitical case at all. So they're effectively saying it did happen, but somehow differently. And the last objective was clearly trying to discredit the Czech government's response, which during the time was trying to mobilize allies to expel Russian diplomats and intelligence officers during the time, which I would say Czech Republic was not really successful compared, for example, to the Salisbury case, which happened in the UK a couple of years before. So the Czech Republic did not really receive such a strong, let's say, response by the allies in the numbers of expelled Russian diplomats and intelligence officers. To some extent, it's also because of the weak government communication strategy, I would say, on the Czech side, on Czech government side. So it's not the allies who are really to blame, I would say, in that case, but that depends on the point of view. So those were effectively the core goals which we have identified within the Russian discourse in this study, and I would say they are quite similar to other actually cases which we have seen in the past, but it was very urgent because it became top of the news and also top of the international news for some time as well. So I'll maybe now hand over the floor to Lucia directly, so that you can get into it.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Lucia, representing Europolicy, which is basically a think tank which is working with the media known as Euractiv. Euractiv is present in Slovakia, in Czech Republic. There is a colleague from Czech Republic, Andrej, of mine, but actually Euractiv is a network, probably you know the Euractiv.com, mostly based in Brussels, and then there are medias across Europe. The one in Slovakia is second largest around Europe. We do have partially this analytical part, which is represented by Europolicy. So coming into this project, we kind of utilized our analytical capacity and capabilities within this project. So what we did, accept this part that Jakub was presenting, this first part of analysis, which was very much concentrated around Vrbětice. Our main second part of analysis was much more focused on identifying this Czech and Slovak disinformation environments, the methods which are being used in combating disinformation, fighting against disinformation, and also kind of presenting or thinking about opportunities for cooperation across Slovakia, Czech Republic, and perhaps even further. What we did at the end of it is also prepared some policy recommendations. So what you're going to see as a result, it is unfinished yet, but the analysis, which is primarily focusing on those nation-specific and then some kind of European-specific, more general recommendations. How we set it up is that firstly, over this year, we had, besides working on this analysis that Jakub presented, we had events and workshops where we kind of defined the structures and then prepared out of it questionnaire. The questionnaire was fairly extensive, yet it was only made of 9 questions. We sent it particularly to expert groups, to targeted really experts in Slovakia and Czech Republic who actually are working either in the government, either in NGOs, academia, and other places directly with disinformation. Out of this targeted audience, we get approximately 30 experts coming back to us, and I'm going to present the results, how they are seeing what it is, how they are kind of thinking about this environment and how they are thinking to tackle it. Next. So as I said, the kind of responders that we had in the questionnaire were especially Czech Republic, mostly state or public institutions representatives and research organizations. In Slovakia, we also had much more involvement of private sector, which is probably caused by the fact that we have several smaller companies or startups that are dealing with disinformation. So that influenced it at the end. Next. I'm going to go through the questions and just give you some general details, and then later on I'm going to kind of pinpoint what are the main outcomes of it. So thinking about the factors in spreading disinformation, again, probably it's very small for you, you cannot see it over here. We will be sharing these graphs with you, but what I mean to specifically point out is that particularly in Slovak Republic, experts are thinking that the factors that are spreading disinformation, and they were kind of voluntarily writing this down, are much more political. So political actor, leaders of parties are much more relevant factor in spreading disinformation than in Czech Republic. Nobody even mentioned it. In Czech Republic, experts are mostly thinking about online social media that are not having any moderation as the main kind of ecosystem where the disinformation is spreading. In Slovakia, it is quite similar, but as much more Facebook and Instagram are relevant, this is the main cause or main factor or the ecosystem where the disinformation are spread according to Slovaks. What is an interesting factor, I'm going to go to it later on, but chain emails in Czech Republic, this is something quite specific, which is not very much happening in Slovakia. Secondly, the factors of fighting disinformation. So kind of what is the bubble that is tackling disinformation? We looked into legislation, into kind of capacities, capabilities. And according to this, in Slovakia, the main kind of most problematic factor in fighting is information, according to experts. In Slovakia, personal capacities. In Czech Republic, it's a bit more about finances. That's slightly division. Slovaks are seeing much more troubles in legislative instruments. Czechs, on the other hand, talking more about maybe coordination, especially on the state level. That's a slight difference. Another question that we looked in was into the importance of the cooperation of public and non-governmental institutions, which also was kind of pointed out on the previous slide, especially in Czech Republic. The main issue is are seeing the most important factors in Slovakia and in Czech Republic seem to be similar. So use of professional capacities of non-state actors in state administration seem to be quite important. A lot of sources, a lot of capabilities are being kind of utilized in the state architecture in other ways. More regular communication seem to be kind of a less important, and then ad hoc communication or cooperation between actors, the lowest importance was given, and that's very comparable in both countries. When we talk about finances or some kind of, when we ask the experts, where do you think that the finances should go primarily? This is very bad graph for you to see, but again, I'm just going to quickly say the most important for Czech experts was education by far, and then also strategic communication as the main factors where they think the investment in these areas should be. In Slovakia, besides education, the legislation is an important factor, and effective repression. I'm going to come back to this, but the legislation, effective measures or utilizing the existing measures is an important factor, which I will come back to, and it's really kind of uniting both countries in that. When it comes to cooperation of Czech Republic and Slovak disinformation scene, so now we look, according to the experts, the spread of disinformation is happening rather organically. It's not something that is being coordinated. Actually, very few experts are thinking that there is a regular coordinated cooperation of the disinformation scene between Slovaks and Czechs, just because of the language proximity, and that the language proximity seems to be not such an important factor. Rather the political and special national contexts seem to be much more relevant, according to experts. And another thing was the kind of ideas about what kind of forms the Czechs and Slovak experts, or this bubble of state and non-state actors that are present in this area of tackling disinformation, how they could work together. And this is again very similar result, targeted support of Czech and Slovak cooperation with in between non-state actors seem to be the easiest and the most functioning way, according to both sides. More formalized cooperation on the state level seem to be less, maybe having maybe a little bit less impact, because we all see that there's a lot of words on that, how much we should do together, but the actual political push is not really existing. And the lowest importance was given to the kind of offer the national level, either European or transatlantic level, because as I'm going to explain later, it seems that experts are thinking that the national coordination and the national context seem to be the most relevant for the way how we are creating this ecosystem. So these were the questions. There were a couple, you see, there were not all 9 of them. There were other questions that you posed about some ideas of which were the most successful campaigns against disinformation, or which campaigns did you find to be actually not working at all. So there are a couple of other things that were present in the analysis, which we will definitely share with you. to go to some commonalities and differences and the outcomes of these questionnaires. Regarding the sources and spreading of disinformation, the most problematic, according to both sides, are basically online platforms. I mentioned the moderated and unmoderated social networks, but of course, especially disinformation media, I think quite nothing surprising, and particularly the chain emails in Czech Republic, as I mentioned, are some kind of the most relevant sources for spreading misinformation in both countries. The selection of topics or narratives is also coming quite similar. It is based a lot on fear and the conflict, political conflict that is going on, very much nation-specific conflict that is going on. This is how the disinformation actually thrives. Standard media, even though there is, especially in the Vrbětice case, there in the part of analysis of Vrbětice case, there is a difference between the trust of Czechs into Czech national media and trust of Slovaks to Slovak national media, because there's quite a difference in financing. But in general, experts are not thinking about it as something very problematic, or let's say this is not really the main problem. And then also experts are agreeing that narratives between Czechia and Slovakia are similar due to maybe language proximity. However, they are neither shared nor coordinated. They might be shared maybe in, for instance, like in the case of Vrbětice, if Miloš Zeman as an authority is giving an information, then the Slovak sources are going to use him as a main kind of source and pointing it out. But other than that, there is really not major coordination. What is quite specific for Slovakia and Slovak expert, what they were pointing out is the socioeconomic disparities in Slovakia and how much effect they have in spreading or trusting or being lured and being able to be lured by this information. This is very much specific for Slovakia, and it's coming out as the political and parliamentary campaign is growing in Slovakia. It's coming kind of ahead. Regarding the capacities and financing, again, this kind of commonalities are mostly related to needs for interinstitutional cooperation, which must be the key. From Slovakia, for instance, we know that while maybe some ministries, especially the office of the Prime Minister in recent years, during COVID, much more the Ministry of Health, Interior Ministry, maybe Ministry of Defense and Foreign Ministry, they come on together and try to cooperate, but there are still ministries, especially when there's a different political head in that ministry, that simply doesn't come on board with them. In Slovakia, in this special case, it is Ministry of Education. There is very little coordination, and Ministry of Culture. Also, they are relevant for media, but they are not on board in that bubble of coordination. Warnings to replace state duties by NGOs. This is also very much vocalized by experts both in Czech Republic and Slovakia, because NGOs and people that are working outside of state or government in these areas, they may be building their capacities, but they cannot certainly replace the state. They cannot get very much close to the state because they are risking to get very much politicized. And on the other hand, they still should keep being a certain way of watchdog. They certainly are not the media, but in a way they should be the one challenging the structure or being there to kind of put the mirror in front of state structures. That's why this politicization of non-state actors shouldn't be present, and experts are very much pointing out towards that. Particularly in Slovakia, but also by Czech experts, the responsibilities of digital platforms are being mentioned in our questionnaires. We know in Slovakia there is quite some kind of agenda, especially on non-state actors, to go and talk to social networks, literally go and speak to Tomáš himself talked many times to representatives of the Meta and Twitter, I think. And but yes, Google, of course. TikTok, I'm not sure if you talked to TikTok people yet, but probably it's on the agenda. Anyway, the discussions are ongoing, but they are not very fruitful. Let me say it this way, not much is coming out of it. Slowly we are learning how these tiny languages like Slovak, tiny languages even like Czech, are being handled in social media, and we know that the capacities of the social networks are way too little for how much even income these little languages are generating for them. And this is very much pointed out also by experts. And education as the main place to invest, I mentioned, is mentioned by Czechs and by Slovaks. Media literacy, and I'm going to point that out, it's not just media literacy for kind of a general public, but there are special targeted groups. I'm going to mention them in a while. And critical thinking. So media literacy and critical thinking as two educational kind of areas where the financing should be channeled. Regarding capacities and financing, there is a little bit more differences between Slovakia and Czech Republic, or according to experts that we had questionnaires filled in by. So stable coordination structures are needed or mentioned very much in Slovakia, and also as the social network capacities. That's some kind of a Slovak thing. In Czech Republic, focus on coordination and strategic communication. This is something that was created in Czech Republic, then it died, and still the experts are mentioning it that it might be working. On the other hand, in Slovakia, we officially kind of have it, but the situation didn't get much better, so that's maybe up for discussion. Personal capacities as the most important factor for tackling disinformation. So Slovakia, so Slovaks think that as we will have people, then things will get much better. In Czech Republic, people or experts are more thinking, once we will have finances, then things will go easier. Obviously, it goes hand in hand. I wonder, and we also discussed it internally, what might be the differences. Probably this kind of a brain influx is so much mentioned in Slovak media that maybe experts are more looking into that. And in financing, probably in Czech Republic, this is also much more of a present thing. So this is kind of a difference. Next slide, we go to legislation. All experts are awaiting how the Digital Services Act particularly is going to be implemented, and how much it is going to bring into our own legislation and what is going to actually change. So this is kind of big expectation from both sides. Controversial approach of expert was expressed towards repression. So blocking or canceling disinformation channel maybe seem to be some kind of or seem to have a wow effect, but actually experts are pointing out that this is not the way to deal with it. It is not something that we should it creates way too many questionnaires to actually utilize this way. And experts on both sides, and I think this is also quite interesting finding, are saying that we actually have legislative measures already present in our legislation, whether it's spreading hatred, spreading an alarming message, or kind of legislation of that case, but they are not effectively implemented. Particularly Slovaks are pointing out to that for instance, that there is a burden of proof which is lying, which lies on the injured party. Injured party in many cases can be state. So if the state is not proving the kind of damage, then it's very difficult. In Slovakia, we have several cases which actually showed how troublesome this implementation is. First, where we actually seen videos where a person who was kind of security expert was given money by the Russian representative or the diplomat from the Russian embassy. There is a video, there is a transcript, we hear what they are saying. The man, the Slovak guy, got what did he get? He had to pay something.
It wasn't that much,
That was,
right?
yeah, it was a fine that he got, and that was pretty much it. So he
A couple
did-
of hundreds of euros. I
Yes,
think,
yes,
something like
it wasn't even like big sum. So that was one thing, and then people are thinking, okay, well, like, what kind of, like, we see this is a state, interference directly. What can be bigger than this? The guys paid probably what he was given kind of back to state. And another case was, and that's kind of also another simple, bizarre case in Slovakia where the member of the parliament from far right party was actually trying to. Now, I don't exactly know what was the case, but his excuse was that he doesn't know how to use a computer. That's why he wasn't the one to write whatever hateful messages. So then the case was closed. So he was actually proven that he didn't know how to use the computer. Right. You can maybe fix me.
This piece of trivia actually contains one funny detail because he was in front of a judge because he created like 300 posts where he was blatantly blaming one person, one doctor, that he is manipulating the public during the time of the pandemic. And basically he was saying like, oh, I'm not in control of that page. But the reality is that there were videos which were made by that person where he's talking about that particular doctor, smearing him in many ways. And for judge, this was like okay statement that the person who was actually on the camera making these smearing videos about that person was just saying that I wasn't controlling that Facebook page. And I think that the judge who actually listened to that kind of rationalization of the statement, he must be like in complete detachment from how the technical aspect of creating content works. So that really tells you like how the judges maybe should step up their game and knowledge when they are having such court cases in the future.
So
It's very absurd on so many levels. So
as we have, especially in Slovakia, these bizarre cases which are showing how ineffective some of the legislative tools that we actually have in place are, then the experts are pointing out that, okay, let's not invent anything new, let's stick to what we have, but let's actually learn how to utilize it. And the very last comparison of possibilities of cooperation between Czechia and Slovakia goes that experts are thinking that the independent disinformation ecosystem needs to stay independent. That's an important part. The differences in national contexts I mentioned, support for targeted cooperation of non-state actors who tackle disinformation is probably the best way how to go. The state actors don't seem to be very much stepping up their game, and then this the EU level or transnational level, as they are kind of missing in many ways the particularities of the national context, then it is people or experts are discussing it in a lower way. Again, just very little difference was mentioned in capacities of political parties. I mentioned it at the beginning in Slovakia, especially now as we are at the time before election. We see, and I think Tomáš will talk about it, that the political actors seem to be the most important factors or most important channels through which disinformation are spreading, and you cannot block them. Everything is called as a political game, and you don't have that so much in Czech Republic, for instance, during the pandemic. At least in many ways the political spectrum was kind of coming together, agreeing on very basic pretexts for vaccination, for all kinds of instruments. In Slovakia, everything seemed to be a political context, political topic, divisive content. And another recommendation, speaking too long. First part, I will just go quickly, and again, we are going to share this with you in much more details, but for the kind of let's say, European context. I would still call it European context. We didn't want to go any further. The support for non-state actors seemed to be quite crucial, according to experts. Independent and sustainable, as I said. Do not risk politicization. Do not try to stipulate or replace state functions by the NGOs, by the people that are working there, because also the compromising of NGOs and then the politicizing of the whole topic is quite a big threat. Cooperation between public institutions and NGOs shouldn't be a taboo. This is what we are, I think, learning in Slovakia. In practice, a lot of people that used to be really top experts slowly came to the state part, but eventually that might be kind of playing against them in many ways, but still the NGOs really kind of growing up that ecosystem of experts that are sometimes coming to public institutions. Enhance media literacy, and here I'm going to be also very specific because it's not only about media literacy and critical thinking that I was mentioning for the general public. Experts are saying that let's be very much targeted. Political elites can also be the one that can receive such education, or call it whatever, training. And regarding also media, it's not only journalists that need to understand a little bit more about how the critical thinking and picking up the stories working. It's also about people that are working in media and that are creating the content. There are producers, there are directors, there are script writers, there are even cameramen and people that are cutting the content. It is very much influencing how the actual final product is looking. So we wouldn't suggest to avoid these people from media as well. And then, and this is particular for Slovakia, but I think it may find kind of utilization in other countries as well, law enforcement authorities. So media literacy or critical thinking trainings for law enforcement authorities. We share the similar experience from coming maybe from the socialistic times where this wasn't really much utilized, but I mean, there are ways to do it. Many of you know. Promote responsible journalism, traditional media. Again, they don't seem to be losing the importance. And in many ways, maybe online media are slowly. We were just discussing this with Tomáš, but there is no need to kind of dump traditional media. Education for journalists and other workers or media employees. And in Czech Republic, and I'm going to mention is the importance for transparency, foster the transparency in media ownership. This is something which particular Czech experts were pointing out to. Strengthen legal frameworks, which means application of existing legal measures, avoid introducing new things. And international collaboration, again, national contexts are unique, think about it, work with them, but don't give up on international alliances because there is still a lot to learn. For Czech Republic, very quickly, the comprehensive strategy for disinformation channels. This is something that experts were asking for. Coordination, cooperation. I don't think that I need to go much into details. This part, the streamline of efforts, this is something which we are also trying to do, to kind of divide the area, what these guys are doing, us are doing, so let's not do everybody the same thing. And there doesn't need to be competition in everywhere. Tackle transparency, I mentioned this, media literacy and education, which should be very much targeted. And support fact-checking and investigative journalism. This is something which, for instance, in Slovakia, we do have centers already being created and doing quite excellent jobs. Here it is a little bit more media relevant, so we understood. For Slovakia, socioeconomic disparities, this is an important part. Counter anti-Western sentiment, this is something which in Czech Republic is not such strong as in Slovakia. media literacy and critical thinking. Again, for Slovakia, especially, even working with traditional media is important. We do not have syndicate in Slovakia. We do not kind of cooperate among medias in this kind of more academic way, let's call it this way. Capacity strengthening, that's quite obvious, and the cross-border cooperation, very similar. Slovaks were also calling for more cooperation with Czechs or V4. This wasn't very much presented by Czech experts. Exhausting, but thank you very much for staying up with me, and we will share the rest and the details with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor to Tomáš so that he has his part of the presentation, and then we'll have Q&A.
Hello everyone, my name is Tomáš Kriššák. I work for Gerulata Technologies, where I work as a Stratco consultant. Gerulata is a technology company based in Bratislava, and what we do is we are developing software solutions to do analysis of digital platforms, which help us to understand what is the current situation, what is here in the information space, and how the populace is being influenced by whatever is trending on digital platforms. I might go to the next slide. So one of our key products is a Relevance. It's an AI-powered monitoring research analysis platform. This platform was actually used when we were producing this very specific analysis about Vrbětice. And we are capable of identifying emerging threats in real time, coming from all kinds of platforms that are relevant to European countries. And we can even uncover coordination between those actors who are engaging in information space. And that helps, for instance, the state and actors who are working in strategic or crisis communication to make informed decisions based on data. So this tool is not only used for analysis, but also practically when you're trying to do a day-to-day job in strategic communication. This kind of tool can actually lead the way to make it understand like what needs to be done. If I may go to the next slide. Here you can see an example of how the platform actually looks like. It's very easy to use, and here you can actually navigate yourself through all kinds of content that are present in digital platforms. In case of Vrbetice analysis, we were using, for instance, filters that helped us to see using keywords like what kind of content was actually discussing the whole pace of Vrbetice, and of course, because of their of the language filter, we were able to distinguish between posts that were written in Slovak, posts that were written in Czech. And as you were asking, like, what was the methodology, why we, for instance, chose these data sets, we were working with more data. With more data information, and we were basically capable of knowing like what kind of information in the data set is cluttered and what kind of information is relevant based on, for instance, the number of interactions it had. We were then able to focus on what's important long term rather than analyzing every small speck of information that would be almost impossible to process. So there is a methodology that is basically based on what is capable because of the technology itself. If I may go to the next slide. This platform itself, it provides you with many options what to explore when coming to information space. Here, for instance, you can see the UI of the sources chapter, and basically this tells you each and every page or source of information has a very different properties that if you explore, you might, for instance, find connections that would be otherwise hidden from. And here, for instance, we are looking at a leader from extremist party Republika, and here you can actually see like what was the trend in how much posts he was capable of posting and how much they were actually posts that were helping him to get engaged with the public based on the interactions that were there. And for instance, if we scroll lower, which is no longer visible in the presentation, you would, for instance, even see a heat map, which would be telling you how often is this person actually using his own page when is he, at what time is he adding new content, whether it is automated, whether it is during working hours. And it gives you more and more contextual information. So if we can go to the next slide. This is like the last picture coming from the Juno platform, and this is actually the connections map, which is very useful when you are doing like analysis on how these actors are actually working together. This will give you like a very good view into how these psychological operations are being executed via various actors who might even look like they are working independently, but then you realize that there is a lot of coordinated activity that is not only coming from one platform, let's say Facebook, but many platforms. Here you can see, for instance, that a lot of content is being shared even among platforms like Telegram. So everything can be traced, everything can be analyzed, and everything can tell you a story that the performers of that story wanted to be hidden from you. Next slide, please. And of course, Gerulata Juno is not the only thing we were working on. We have other technological tools that I believe will be the key to maybe having new possibilities to do analysis like Vrbětice, but this time with even geolocation. In this case, we are looking at Gerulata Sentinel. I think this tool itself would be more handy not only for the analytical departments, but also for law enforcement, because it tells you like what are the current popping places where the new crisis might be happening, because it is using the ability to not only analyze what's going on digital platforms, but it can geolocate that particular information to a particular spot, and then you can actually have a, for instance, very quick knowledge about, let's say, a terrorist attack or some public event that might be causing some mistrust in society. So you would be then able to send, let's say, law enforcement units to a particular place before anyone makes a call. Next slide, please. And this platform itself, it supports more than 100 languages. And in this case, we decided to show you a small demo, like what it looks like when we are looking at, well, the region of Ukraine. And basically, this, for instance, can be used by the law enforcement or emergency services when they are, for instance, looking at the situation after a bombardment of Russian missiles or some attacks that might be happening in the particular area. In case of Vrbětice, you can imagine that when a terrorist attack happens, it's the locals who are the first one who are like tweeting about it, discussing it on Telegram or making some social media posts on Facebook. And basically, by that measure, if you were in law enforcement, you will be then able to send the responders team early on and understand like who was there at the place where something like that happened at first. So even the investigators would have like easier way to do their job. Next one, please. And what makes this tool also unique is that it's powered by artificial intelligence. So once you choose your point of interest, you're then easy to access the whole story, because the AI will then digest the information it was able to gather from all kinds of places, and then give you a quick introduction or summary on what's going on. So you can make your decision in minutes based on the digest that is provided by the AI, instead of going through a lot of data, which at a time of crisis might be very critical. So next slide, please. And here I promised to speak more about the contextual information on Slovak information space. I decided to show you one of the best examples of how foreign and domestic psychological operations are mixing up in Slovakia and are clearly creating a way for hybrid threats to well, define the fate of my nation, of Slovakia. And basically here you can see a protest that was happening in a few years ago in 2021, when Slovakia was about to pass DCA, the Defense Cooperation Agreement between Slovakia and the United States. And imagine that during the third most deadliest wave of COVID-19, thousands of Slovaks went to the streets in our capital to protest in front of presidential palace against this particular agreement. And as you can see, there were anti-American slogans, Russian flags. So the agenda and the motivation of the group that was gathering there was pretty clear. So what happened? If we go to the next slide, you can see that there was actually quite a big number of interactions that were connected to positive content regarding DCA. But if we go to the next slide, you will see that it was nothing compared to the negative sentiment that was created among DCA. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that there actually is a possibility to create a map. Actors who for 2 months were working together to artificially create panic among Slovaks that if we will pass DCA, Slovakia will become a puppet state of the United States. We will have nuclear warheads placed on in our country. We will be dragged to a war that is being planned in Washington, and etc., etc. So if we go to the next slide, you will be able to see who those actors were. Well, in Slovakia, it was mostly political parties, but what's very interesting is to see the central cluster in this kind of a universal narratives, and you would see how this coordination actually happened and why this psychological operation was so successful. Because the political parties, which are still very relevant and are anti-systemic, they are also extremistic in their narratives and ideology. They were misusing this central cluster of junk news or junk media that has been, well, growing since 2014 in Slovakia and Czech Republic as well. There's more than 2,000 actors, independent actors in the particular cluster, and all of them were basically working as an amplifier of all the political messages that were coming from these extremistic parties or anti-system parties. And for the common people in Slovakia, this was like an avalanche of information, and everything that was pretty much a lie or propaganda or disinformation was very relevant for Slovak public, because it was not only bringing fear and polarization to our society, but this was coming from so many sources that for people with even critical thinking, this became something that they had somewhere in the back of their head, thinking oh, so many sources, so many people are saying the same thing, so this must be true. So you can imagine if you create a machine for propaganda, you can end up in the same situation like in Slovakia, where it becomes not only something like a vessel of foreign influence, but you can have way too many people who are working in favor of this foreign influence because they have their own agenda, and they see that if they lie to people and polarize the society in such way, they might even gain political gain, which, for instance, right now in Slovakia is pretty much showing up. We will have elections in September, and basically all these actors who were very reluctant in manipulating the public are pretty much doing very well in the polls, because they were the ones who actually shaped this mental reality that has now, I would say, consuming Slovakia. Next slide, please. And as you can see, when we were analyzing what happened, not only in the time of Vrbětice, but also during the much later case of DCA, you can see that the actors who are promoting disinformation or Russian interest are, I would say, busy bees compared to the Western or neutral actors who, in this case, you can see that Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Korczak, was speaking about this case only 9 times. And
this blue part and then the green.
Oh yeah, the green part is actually mainstream media. So you can, for instance, see Deník Ender, which is independent media. They are I would say, the one that are objective media, and they were only talking about DCA 31 times. That's quite enough, I would say. It's mediocre. But when you see how the state actors or democratic actors were talking about DCA, you see that the numbers were very low. So imagine you're in a room full of people and you're trying to put out your agenda, you're trying to influence people so they would be on your side. And you would be speaking only twice during 1 hour event. And 58 minutes, all the others who would be lying constantly would be the ones leading the debate. Well, of course, people who would be watching the debate would be influenced by something that was told by the lying side. And here you can see that, for instance, this very unsuccessful politician, Mr. Kmelar, he was talking about That's true.
Sorry.
Very nice.
Completely right.
So he in period of 2 months, he mentioned DCA 66 times, and every time in very manipulated content and context. So imagine that his agenda was to create elaborate text that took like hours to write down, and he even produced more than 2 a day. So he was very active. And that person is also a guest of honor, for instance, in places like Russian embassy in Bratislava. So you can imagine that what is his agenda. Next slide, please. Also, our analysis has been showing, and this is my favorite visualization because it's more like for people who are fans of real-time strategies like Age of Empires, this pretty much tells you like how you're going to lose the game. Imagine your enemy is using older sources to actually create a better impact in combining their forces and putting them into attack formation. This is what the people who were promoting the Russian interest in Slovakia were doing for 2 months, and they are continuing to do that. And you can see that the red and pink is actually showing like how the narratives coming from political parties that were polarizing society were clearly coming to the central cluster of pseudo media that were just helping to get that to be reached out to many people. On the contrary, the state was unable to put their talking points to the other actors from the media landscape, and it was the other way around. Like the state was borrowing narratives and explanations from the media that were doing this because the state was inactive. So in my opinion, it's like a catastrophic way of how a state should act in such kind of cognitive crisis. Next slide, please. And here we were looking at the actors who were actually the most vocal during the time of the DCA cognitive warfare case, and you can see that the most interactions were coming from party Smer SD, and mostly from this guy, Mr. Blaha, who was eventually banned from Facebook for dehumanizing American citizens. But here you can see him, he was in the Red Square talking about Russia, what a great country it is. Only a few days before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, he was posting social media posts where he was saying like the whole war in Ukraine is actually a hoax made up by US or some liberal politicians in Slovakia. So he had a very clear agenda in doing whatever there was to make people afraid of DCA, and in the end, when you really think about the context, well, who's benefiting from the polarization or lack of trust towards our alliance with the US, with the West? Well, it's the Russia that has been always intervening in our, in the cognitive realm, trying to influence the population in Slovakia. The next actor, if we can go back. The next actor is Republic, which is like a split far-right party from from Mr. Kotlova. And here in the picture, you can actually see Lucia was mentioning this video footage of how one of the assistants from the Republica was actually receiving cash for fulfilling tasks for Russian embassy in Slovakia. So basically, he was committing treason, and he's fine. He was only having to pay a fine. So yeah, the guy is fine, and he still is involved with Republica. So they were also responsible for creating all these nonsense and disinformation. And then when it comes to actors, we call them extreme left, but I wouldn't call them leftist because they really are like just pro-Russian proxy actors. And for instance, here on the picture, you can see Mr. Chmela with Mr. Bratričko, and this was just a few days. And Ambassador Bratričko, yes. Thank you. And that was only a few days before Mr. Chmela started to spill out every day some posts about DCA to actually wreak panic and insecurity among Slovaks. And then it's junk media, which were originated, for instance, by Mr. like Tigorelio Grostas and his Zenovek, which is a magazine in Slovakia. And this actually video shows him at the Russian embassy with the previous ambassador. And Mr. Rostas was so clumsy that he actually made audio recording of him talking with this Russian ambassador, and he was directly asking him for financial support, so his magazine would be fulfilling Russian interest in Slovakia. So imagine creating this kind of audio from such meeting and then be so clumsy that it actually leaked from his phone somehow. And now you can actually listen to it on YouTube because the whole interview is there. So basically, these four actors were actually the predominant groups that were helping Slovaks to be confused about our international agreement with US, and it clearly shows what kind of fifth column we have in Slovakia serving the interests of Kremlin in terms of cognitive manipulation. Next slide, please. And this is one maybe final slide showing us that Facebook remains Russia's best friend when it comes to completing their interests. This is a comparison of Facebook posts and interactions between January 2020 and January 2022. As you can see, Russian embassy in Slovakia is the most engaged and active Russian embassy in the whole Europe. Actually, it has more engagement and more content than Russian embassies in far bigger countries like US. And when you compare it to the activities of, for instance, the second most successful communicator when it comes to local embassies, the Embassy of the United States of America, you see that they are like basically David versus Goliath. So you can imagine like what is the strength of Russian influence of Slovakia, because that's like, I would say one actor, one official actor. But there is plenty of other actors who are in some way doing the bidding of Kremlin, yet presenting themselves as political powers or pseudo-academics or as successful politicians. It's basically the space is filled with them. And to this day, they are the kings of the narrative. And it's not only Vrbětice, it's way too many other narratives. And based on the data we are analyzing constantly, the result of even this year's election in huge part, in cognitive sense, will be dedicated or dictated by these actors whose effort is still predominant. And unfortunately, big platforms like Facebook or even big platforms like Google, because YouTube is also very relevant, are doing very little to stop this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tomáš and Lucia. So we do have now time for the Q&A. Sorry for the long intro, but I hope it was worth it. So let's jump into it. Any questions or comments? We do have time for them. Please, go ahead.
One question.
Yes.
There's no other understood properly. So the Russian embassy in Bratislava, the most active embassy
By far.
within social media.
Yeah, we did compare its activity with other countries, like there's a Russian embassy in London, Prague, all over the world. We compared their posts, like how much engagement they are getting, how many posts they create, how much they are involved in making sure that those things will really stick in and influence the public. We found out like that for Russians, Slovakia is a spot. That's the place where they really want to hit hard and have the influence that would, well, turn the table of sympathies. So one of the reasons why they are mostly using Facebook because they know how popular it is in Slovakia, but also, for instance, Newsfront, which is a proxy based in occupied Crimea, has a Slovak version, which after 24th of February 2022 started to re-expand their activity on Telegram. So they have like diversion of who they want to influence, how they want to influence. And Telegram, we did some other analysis for NATO, and there we found out that Telegram is basically for Russians in terms of Slovakia, like a opening spot or this first gate from which they are getting all the narratives into our information space. From there, the other actors that are on Telegram and other platforms are then taking it and disseminating it to other places, but especially Facebook groups.
Okay, so how long was the period you've checked about their activity on Facebook?
That was 2 years, I think.
That was 2 years. January 2020. But also we have like data sets that tell us the story of how they were active in since 2004, since Facebook was actually founded. So we can like strap data even back to the date when things were really old.
Okay, so next question, please. David, please, from the Dutch Embassy. Sorry,
Yeah.
forgot to mention.
Thanks so much. Very interesting how you sort of dissected all the things you found and presented to us. Now it seems that the people peddling all these anti-Western narratives are doing a lot of things that are perfectly legal, like building news websites, news aggregators, using whatever bots or bot advertising to get their message out. Where do you see the potential for the Western narrative or the European narrative to claw its way back in? What should the people who want to promote these narratives, what should they do to get back in the game, because they're literally being flooded now by the other narratives? Yeah. What's your thinking there?
So Lucia, please.
I have one thing to think about it, and I have one thing which we are talking a lot, particularly the European narratives for Euractiv. Of course, it's an important topic. We see, and in Czech Republic it is a little bit different, but in Slovakia we do have a national news agency who is getting the only people that are present in Brussels from Slovakia are 3 or 4 correspondents from Brussels, and the only the news agency, which is really a base for most of the other media, I'm still talking about relevant traditional media, are taking content from the national agency. They have one guy present in Brussels. He writes 7 or 8 stories every single day, and he is basically, what he does is synthesizing whatever the commission is putting there through. So it's absolutely not set and put into national context. It just seems so far away, cut out of reality. And this is really the main source for the mainstream media about Brussels, about EU agenda for Slovaks. Uncomprehensive, unsynthesized, not put into any context, just this legislation came into force, bam. So I personally see this as such a critical thing that it's not really difficult to fix it.
I'm sorry, the Slovak radio and public television doesn't have one person?
They do have a correspondent, but again, they do not
They
the
don't need
radio,
text, right?
the text, no, it doesn't give so much of further spreading of information to other channels.
Right.
So I find it beyond absurd how this is happening, and it's not being tackled. So what we are, for instance, looking into is to how, if we see that there is some kind of interest from people to trust media, maybe it's getting lower, the traditional media, maybe it's lowering down, but let's grab it and let's kind of utilize it in a way. Why not to maybe invest or think how to, as I mentioned, also to educate the current journalists about the agenda. Not only journalists, also going further to media employees. This is very tricky. When we in Euractiv are getting requests, it's usually the dramaturgia, I don't know how it's...
The editors? Maybe?
The editors, exactly, who are creating the narratives. It's not always the journalist, not always who's creating the narrative that is going further to the media. That's also very important to work with them, and I don't see this happening ever. So from the traditional point of media, I would say it's...
When we are looking at the data, for instance, from digital platforms, we see that for every bad actor, for 200 bad actors, there's maybe one good actor who doesn't even have that much content or sources or whatever to actually make it out, that he would be even comparable anywhere near the impact that those clusters of influence actors have. So the information war in Slovakia is really it's like just one guy fighting 200 guys. It's impossible to win or do anything about it. So I think there must be really comprehensive, very complex solution to this, which would start with digital platforms starting to be more responsible and rethinking the model in which they are shaping the algorithm, which is then shaping the news feeds of millions of Slovaks who are constantly getting more and more propaganda, which is always viral, always successful. And then when you present them with facts, with reality that is quite more complex, people are, well, not so interested in it. So the algorithm doesn't really promote that kind of content. So that's one aspect. But also when you see, for instance, like how little funding there goes or planning there goes into digital literacy, media literacy, or even things like how to build our own identity, that we Slovaks are actually democratic people with our own history, it's almost non-present. So we are like really in a very deep crisis, and yet the investment in those very crucial areas is minimum, close to zero, I would say. And, you know, in 1918, when Czechoslovakia was created, it was an idealistic country until 1938, where things fell apart and the dream was over. Since that moment, Czechs and Slovaks were under constant foreign influence, first the Nazis, then the communists. And when in the 90s we had the chance to actually reinvent ourselves, for a very short period of time we were, I would say, drunk with freedom, and then it was like the wounds were again shaking the nation's collective consciousness. And now we are in this position where I would say that our generation is quite responsible for making things right, because we might not even have the period of freedom and prosperity that we have now. So we have to tell our story to ourselves and be true in what it really means, how hard it is to be a democratic country and be able to, you know, defend those things. Because falling for extremist narratives, that's the easy path. And make people understand that, well, I can think of campaigns, I can think of leaflets, but if we don't really put this into a thing of a culture, which would be supported by really big planned activities where private sector, civic sector, and the state would be all playing their part, we are nowhere near being successful at this. So it's unprecedented cognitive crisis, and it's just like it is.
Thank you. So here, please.
Thank you. You mentioned that there was a space for cooperation between Czechia and Slovakia. In which areas and in what ways would you foresee such a cooperation?
I was mentioning it, so maybe I can
Let's go ahead.
respond to that. We see that it is being mentioned that I think many of us were sitting in many kind of events where this was discussed. It seems that the national level and state actors are now going to go any further than as they are now, to create some meetings, some workshops, sometimes coming together when there are some ministers. They keep on mentioning how important and connecting issue it is, but there's not a political will to actually step it up. So what I was also mentioning is that to keep on kind of exchanging these kind of actual examples and maybe sharing the ideas of how to fight it, share technology. Even this is a new thing. Gerulata technology is not the only one. Also very good, also very good. But there are many also in Czech startups and in Slovakia startups that are, for instance, utilizing much more of AIs in moderating discussions and so on. I think this is some kind of areas which is going to be very much relevant. So trying to find these synergies between these non-state actors, as far as we don't find out that the state actors will want to step up and go beyond. Because at the local level, at the international area, it's becoming less and less relevant. That's what we understood and see, like the least practical. We can exchange bizarre stories from our countries, but it doesn't go further than this. But if you have maybe better idea.
Tomáš, you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree that we can cooperate in terms of technology, because the platforms that are being relevant in Slovakia and Czech Republic are almost the same. So the technical solutions used in Slovakia can be pretty much adopted to Czech Republic like in a matter of hours. And even now, some of the technology is already used by actors in Czech Republic and many other countries. But also there must be a lot of collaboration between the professionals who are, for instance, doing working in the field of strategic communication and crisis communication, because, for instance, the DCA scenario was in some way repeated in Czech Republic, but it was not so successful because in Czech Republic there is not so many actors willing to work with the or for the Russians or for their interests as in Slovakia. So for some other domestic reasons, they were this successful. But I do remember conversations and debates with experts from Czech Republic where we were giving them recommendations like almost instantly after DCA happened in Slovakia, or this particular cognitive crisis happened in Slovakia, and we were giving out the advice like what should be done next. Because, for instance, me and my colleagues, we were even providing recommendations to people from the Slovak government, and they decided not to act. And we really warned them that they will pay a high price for being inactive in such a scenario, and that really happened. So I think that countries that are not in such troublesome position as Slovakia can learn from us. As some wise person said, like a wise person learns from the mistakes of others, the stupid one from their own. So.
Thank you. There was the next question there, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Heda Hassan. I'm from the Embassy of Finland here in Prague. I would like to continue what David was asking a bit about like the concrete initiatives. Is there any concrete initiatives of like how to make things better? Like, are there some NGOs like putting more factual information into social media where the Slovak public is? Because what we have learned is also that isn't it quite low the percentage of Slovak people who actually follow the traditional news outlets? So fixing the traditional media doesn't necessarily fix the problem. So how do you, is there any like projects or initiatives in this sense? Thank you.
You know about all of them.
Sounded like 80%.
And then 80%.
So that tells you a lot about how Slovakia is really in trouble, because yes, we have initiatives like Project Hope, all of positive engagement, which is completely focused on improving media literacy. Then you have Zmudry, which is basically helping students, teachers to have courses, free courses on all kinds of informative campaigns and lectures. So there's plenty of things that can help young people or even older generations to navigate themselves in new media. The problem is that there is no systematic support coming from the state or even private sector. So most of these things are self-funded, being held by people who are really just seeing that, okay, the situation is dire, so we have to continue. And if things won't change, I think that even those people, things that do already exist won't be able to sustain themselves and thrive. So we are really in a bad position, because I think that in Slovakia there is talent, there is solutions, there are people who are willing to do the work, yet the resources are always the problem. And for instance, to me it's crazy that in Slovakia you have like a few thousand people who actually are wealthy or very wealthy people, and yet there's only like 2-3 families that are actually helping these initiatives to stay afloat. So it tells you a story that in Slovakia, we really have to ignite the society to make people understand that this is not something that's going to go away. This is something that we have to fix ourselves. There are not going to come some, I don't know, angel investments from overseas. This needs to be fixed right here by us. And before we have that, we will be moving far.
I think you should mention also, this is an interesting initiative, you know about it?
Yeah.
You go.
I mean, there's many of them, but of course, like Demagogue, which is another one. It's a fact-checking organization, and they are doing great jobs in making sure that the public actually is aware that some of the politicians are more likely to lie than others based on what they were saying and how it is.
Political TV debate or something like
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
And then very unique project started by Peter Janšarík, Konspiratory SK, which basically helps the people who are buying ads from Google to stop buying ads from pages that are actually promoting or creating content that is in some case manipulated. And it's a very complex system that helps prevent the damage of the brand. And in the end, it really helps to economically drain sources that for many years were known to be these basic sources of disinformation or manipulation or propaganda. So I would say Slovakia, in my opinion, when I see this in comparison to the international situation, I think that Slovakia is like a country of startups, a cauldron of ideas that are helping to fight disinformation. But yet all these ideas are just, left to live their own life. And that doesn't really help when we're fighting like a big cognitive war like is happening in Slovakia.
I think we have time for last question in this formal setting, and then there'll be a lot of time for informal questions as well. But any other questions here? Okay, I think we have exhausted you, so hopefully it was good. And our dear experts will, I'm sure, will be here for a couple of more minutes, so you can discuss one-to-one if somebody's interested. And it looks like it's still raining outside as well, so that's good news as well. So thank you very much for all for coming, and we'll keep you informed. Thank you.
Thank you.